Hey, y'all, it did it again. Thought I was pressing one button to start the music, and I wasn't. So, anyway, we've got it sorted, and we're here. Welcome. It's February now, February 2nd. Yay. We've moved into another month. This 20s decade is killing me. I cannot wait till it's done.
Oh yeah.
There are some good things to it, but there's just some not so good things to it, and it's kind of annoying. So,
Here's to a better 2022.
definitely. I know I've gotten over the what we call fluvid and a cold, but it looks like you're still suffering from a cold.
Allergies or a cold or something. Um, Six of one, half a dozen of the other. I don't know. But anyway, I'm here.
Gotcha.
Soldier on.
So, what's going on in your world this week, sir?
Let's see. Well, I have uh, about halfway through the fourth,
Hmm.
little over halfway through the fourth and final book of the Conquest of Bell series.
Good.
Already started on I've got a book cover designer who lives in Belgium, and she's already started on the book cover, which is going to be fabulous. And I can't wait because it's the series I've been working on for a couple of years now, and
And it's a
so
good series. I've read all of them. I'm
yeah,
really excited to have this one come.
I'm glad to try to get it to bring it to conclusion. Also, in February on the 18th, 19th, and 20th, I'm going to be my first Comic Con. I'll be at the SPC Comic Con in Bossier City at
Nice.
the Bossier City Convention Center. And that'll be a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday event. And that'll be my first of the year. So I'm looking forward to that.
Nice. Well, our first one is actually going to be February 18th, 19th, and 20th. And it's going to be in San Angelo. But I'm not necessarily going to be showing there. I'm actually helping to run the con, but I will be there. So,
Well, you got a long ways to go then, don't you?
yes, it's a bit of a hike, but it's all for the con life, is what
Oh,
I
yeah.
call it.
Oh, yeah.
And I love it. I
Oh,
wouldn't.
yeah.
It's
Always
like
have a,
once you do it, you can't.
right. Get to meet great people and, and of course the people that attend cons are the people that read our books. So it's always
Hmm.
nice, to have that kind of an audience.
Right. So today's topic is kind of a unique one. Why to write sci-fi and fantasy from a faith-based perspective. This is
Yes.
actually good for writers as well as readers. Kind of gives the readers an inside track, and
Hmm.
it's something that's important to both of us because
Right.
both of us do it. So, kind of, what's your opinion on it?
Well, my opinion has sort of evolved over the last 10 or 15 years. Um, a lot of sci-fi authors and fantasy authors that are familiar, which we don't need to name them. Very few of them include faith-based um, themes
Hmm.
for whatever reason. Um,
Like C.S. Lewis is a big one that does.
right, which
Hmm.
is ironic, isn't it? Tolkien and
Hmm.
Lewis, both giants in Christian community, and of course C.S. Lewis, is a also a very prolific author in Christian themes and things such as that.
Hmm.
But my take on it is that because in the past, and you correct me if you have, correct me if I'm wrong about this, CJ, about as far as your perspective historically has been. But in the past, it was like if you were a Christian,
Hmm.
okay, um, you shouldn't be writing science fiction, and you certainly shouldn't be writing fantasy because you have sorcery and magic and
Hmm.
things like that, which are so have viewed by some as being
Hmm.
anti-Christian or anti-faith,
Yeah, totally
and
agree with that.
and the I don't I don't think I think if you look at it through that lens, look at all the other mainstream genres:
Hmm.
historical fiction, romance,
Mhm.
uh, uh, you know, thrillers. I mean, mysteries. How many of them uh, talk? Have content and themes that would be considered outside the range of Christianity that go
Mhm.
against, uh, you know, uh, biblical teachings, for example. And I
I
think you
mean,
can find a lot more examples in those genres and many authors and books than you probably could, or at least as many as you could in the science fiction and fantasy genre.
yeah. I mean, when I told my husband my idea of the Christian sci-fi trilogy that I just finished launching last week, the 25th? Was that last week? Yeah. That I just finished launching last week. The first thing he said to me is that even possible to write a
Okay.
Christian fiction sci-fi? And I said, "Well, I'm a sci-fi geek and I'm a Christian. So both are passions, why not?" And the way I explained it to him is, science fiction is still science fiction. It's the Christian aspect is just how it's dealt with.
Exactly. I agree 100%. The thing that I think we keep in mind as authors as well is how you define what is Christian literature and what is not Christian literature.
Mhm.
Now, in your case, uh, you do your marketing on the books you have written as Christian based or
Yep.
Christian themed books.
Yep. I tell him, I say it's Christian fiction, but it's not your mama's Christian fiction. It's not
Right.
Janet Oakey. It's not, and nothing wrong with those books, but mine are not, your sweet little, you know,
Sure.
Christian fiction books. No, mine are like out there. There's supernatural, paranormal. There's action. There's, you know, police, FBI, military. Now there's sci-fi to add to the list. And, like I said before, you can write any type of genre. It's just the perspective that makes the difference.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think the reason why I, like to venture into those because I'm one of those authors that's kind of known for not being shy when it comes to a lot of different topics.
Okay.
And
Okay.
the reason I don't shy away from them is because Christian, teens and Christian parents need something or some way to help because I've had parents where they've read them and then handed the books to the kids to talk about a specific topic because it's not always addressed, in the way that they would like to approach it. And this gives them an opportunity to, open a door that they may not otherwise have the chance to.
Exactly. And see, that's where um, here in a nutshell, here's where I think uh, we make the mistake of limiting ourselves as authors when it comes to writing in various genres
Mhm.
from a faith-based perspective. Okay, so you uh, you have forgiveness,
Mhm.
major theme of the Bible, forgiveness. You have uh, love your fellow man, love your brother.
Mhm.
Okay, I mean, you have generosity.
Mhm.
Uh, and I could go on and on. Those are themes that, of course, the Bible, uh, from Old Testament to New Testament, uh, are part of forgiveness. For example, I mean, Christ died on the cross for our sins.
Mhm.
Okay, and we can't buy our salvation. It was a free gift,
Mhm.
from God. He gave His only Son. So, a lot of people who read science fiction and fantasy are not Christians, or if they
Mhm.
are, they're you know what's
Closet
kind of a
Christians,
cliche, or
closet
backslidden,
reader, closet readers,
backslidden, yeah,
or
or something like that.
uh,
But so when you introduce, this is the way I feel. Okay, so in my first book, The Treasure Hunt Club,
mhm,
okay, the main character meets and falls in love with a divorced woman who goes to church. She invites him to go to church with her. Now, how many times do you see that, just that one act, going to church,
mhm.
in any book, in any genre, by any author?
Not very often, no.
Okay. So just that concept you don't see very often
Mhm.
outside of Christian literature.
Right.
Okay. in The Janus Witch, uh, which was my second book. Okay. Forgiveness,
Mhm.
forgiveness of past acts, forgiveness of things that the main character did to his own mother.
Mhm.
Okay. Do you see that very often? And
Mm.
his mother was praying for him. And I'm not trying to give it away. It's not again. It's a very good book. It's a paranormal thriller,
Mhm.
but forgiveness. Okay, so how often do you see forgiveness as being mentioned or as an element of any character of any book outside of Christian literature? I mean, it happens,
Well,
but
I
it's
mean,
not very often.
yeah, and even just quoting the Bible. Teens, even in Christian fiction, you don't have a lot of biblical quotes. Teens anymore feel I used to be a youth leader for about 18 years, and a lot of them felt that, the Bible has some really good points, but it was written so long ago, how is it supposed to apply to me?
Right.
And one thing that's kind of a general theme through it is the situations. People are the people at their core. They run into many of the same situations, maybe not exactly the same way, but they run into many situations that are explained in the Bible. For example, killing. In the Sands of Time trilogy, killing a certain character, I'm not gonna say who it is, killing a certain character comes up because there's a group of teens from a youth group, and they're like, "How can we justify it? How is this justified? How, you know, is this something that, you know, him because one is a sheriff. And of course, sometimes police do have to pull the trigger, and they're like, "Well, you're a Christian. How can you justify that?" And so that conversation is taken into it. In the Divine Legacy series, I bring up the subject of the sex trade operation. In the Grace Restored series, abortion is brought up. And it's like a lot of times books, especially Christian books, are afraid to touch these subjects if they're fiction. Not so much if there's nonfiction, because there are certain books that specifically deal with a lot of this stuff in the nonfiction realm. But in the fiction realm, they're kind of afraid to touch some of these subjects. And
Right.
it's like teens anymore, it's like, yes, you're taught a lot of those same principles that you were just talking about, but what about specific things like abortion or the sex trade operation or spiritual warfare even? They don't feel that it necessarily applies to them. And so I know in my books, I take it and I make this book that they supposedly feel is antiquated and use it to apply to their daily life now.
Right.
And it's
So,
not an easy thing to do.
well, in the Open Portal, which is the first book in the Conquest of the Veil series,
Mhm,
the main character is part of a church youth group.
mhm,
Uh, Now, again, you don't. How often do you see any kind of example like that in mainstream fiction of any
mhm.
kind? But I hasten. But so all of that said, okay,
Well,
to
and
sort of
and with that, you actually do address the situation of suicide as well.
right.
And a lot of people think, well, they go to church, so we don't need to worry about that from them. And it's like,
Mm-mm,
no, not
no.
really. You really need to deal with this sort of thing.
Well, and but I'm going to get sidetracked here, but in I guess what I'm saying is that you can you can have the hallmarks of what makes faith what it is
Mhm,
uh, in books that don't specifically target a Christian audience,
mhm,
like Christian fiction, Christian literature. Okay,
yep,
and you can have those themes in science fiction and fantasy. You can have it in any genre. Okay, uh, although it seems like science fiction and fantasy seems to be more off limits for whatever reason. Uh,
yeah, I don't get it, but yes.
but you can introduce those as a writer
Mhm,
to a brand new audience who never darkens the step of a church house.
mhm,
And although it seems rather trivial or small, it's huge in the sense that you know if you look around our country today, do you think Maybe if we had a few more books that emphasize forgiveness,
Mhm.
for care of your fellow man, loving one another, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
Uh, might we be maybe a better society or a better place? Now, I don't want to say, because I don't preach. I don't in the books I write. I don't preach to the right to whoever the readers are, and I don't shy away from if someone's being murdered, they're going to be murdered. If they're killed, they're
Mhm.
killed. Uh, Sometimes the scenes are a little bit more graphic than some people feel comfortable with,
Yeah, I
but
kinda
they're
toed that line too. Yeah.
but it's real.
Mhm.
So I think that we need more people, more writers, more authors
Mhm.
who write fiction of any kind, but
Mhm.
especially science fiction and fantasy that are that can have Christian themes, that can have Christian elements, that can have faith-based elements that are part of their plot, not necessarily the plot, okay? Because if I was doing that, I would be like you, CJ. I'd be writing Christian literature and Christian fiction.
Mhm.
But I think I don't want to say mainstream. That's kind of a cliche, but I try to be a little bit more mainstream. But at the same time, I'm not going to put what I believe
Mhm.
and kick it to the curb to appeal to an audience that doesn't believe what I believe, if that
Right.
makes sense.
Mhm.
I'm not going to include. I'm not going to put things. I'm not going to foist my beliefs on someone else to the point where they become the major themes of the book. But at the same time, if I feel they're important to the story, I'm not going to include them for risk of offending or turning somebody off who is an atheist or something like that,
Mhm.
because I think it's important to my story. And if I feel it's important to my story, then I'm going to keep it. And so I don't know if I explained that right,
No, you
but
did.
you know,
Yeah, and it's the way I look at it is think back to the '80s. I know I'm dating myself, and that's perfectly fine. I'm gonna be 50 this year. I know, but just bear with me a second. In the '80s, we had a lot of, one-hit wonders, a lot of pop rock. As a teen, you like to have some beat to your music. But a lot of Christians, which pretty much the line was Steve Green or Stephen Curtis Chapman, and it's just like, not everybody appreciates that type of style of music. You really can't
right.
run to it. I was a runner, you can't run to it. I'm just saying right now, that's not possible. But, so the Christian community came up with, some that could cross over, like Petra, so that has enough beat that I could run to it, and I could still have the Christian music going for it. And the theme's kind of pumping into my brain, and it's like that's kind of the way I look at these books is, you have to find something that's relevant to today, and you have to find something that may be a little bit different, to appeal to people, and it's like and you kind of gotta figure out how to describe it so they can kind of relate to it. For example, the Sci-Fi trilogy. I explained to them that it's Stranger Things minus the Mind Flayer portion meets X-Men. Well, Stranger Things, maybe, I'm giving people the benefit of the doubt, maybe they might not know about it, but generally most people do. And if you've never heard of X-Men, then you're not living on this planet right now, or you're living in a third, in an area that doesn't have television or something, because X-Men is pretty prevalent. If you can find something that they can understand to compare it to, it makes them, okay, I'm intrigued. And I got a lot of that when Appointed Time first came out. I didn't have Race Against Time out yet, and Out of Time just came out. So now that the trilogy is fully out, there might be, more interest generated in it. But the first the first time they heard about Appointed Time, they're like, "Okay, that does sound interesting." I'm willing to risk the ebook, and I know that you're gonna be in other Comic Cons and I can get the paperback later if I want it. So it's like when you find something that's relative and piques their interest, that will help immensely.
It's it goes back to a good story is a good story.
Mhm.
And I was going to comment, uh, in terms of regardless of the genre that you write, but
Mhm.
specifically we're talking about science fiction and fantasy. You know, you have to be real in the you have to, even though it's a work of fiction, you have to be real in the sense that whoever's reading your book can visualize it in his mind as
Mhm.
something that could and will and should happen. It
Mhm.
can't not make sense.
Yeah.
uh, you know, for example, uh, the Bible's replete with examples of us, you know, of terrible things. Cain killed Abel out of
Mhm.
jealousy. Okay, he was a murderer.
There was
David,
murder, there was rape,
right?
there was all
David,
sorts of stuff.
David was a liar,
Mhm.
an adulterer, and a murderer. You
Yeah, if
know,
you read 1st and 2nd Kings, there's a lot of violence in those 2 books.
yes. So, which is all the more reason why we all need grace,
Mhm.
because whereas we may not go kill somebody or or something like that, we're woefully deficient in so many other areas. So the only with science fiction and fantasy, I found too that because of magic,
Mhm.
okay, and magic is sometimes equivocated for those outside looking in to sorcery or something like that.
Mhm.
So, something of the devil, of something that's evil.
Mhm.
Um, and there is evil.
Mhm.
Look in our world today, there is evil. Okay. How you describe evil is limited only by your imagination, again, if it's realistic to what people's experiences are. So, um, you know, it's fiction by definition,
Mhm.
regardless of genre, is fantasy. You're making something up, but at the same time, you're writing in a context the story that in your reader's mind is a believable thing, as far as,
Mhm.
you know, uh, for example, in The Wizard of Oz, we had the flying monkeys.
Mhm.
In the original in the movie, we saw them fly. Back in those days, it had to be like, compared to the special effects of today, very crude, but it looked like they were flying. Now, is that reality? Well, of course not. Have anyone ever seen a flying monkey?
Mhm.
Well, I haven't, except on The Wizard of Oz. But hey, it makes for a great story,
Mhm.
and and so one could hardly say that Tolkien was an atheist or C.S. Lewis, who
Mhm.
wrote, the Chronicles of Narnia. So I think we need this. Uh, my part is I think we need more faith-based people writing in science and fiction genre
Mhm.
and not shying away from that because they have or feel there's a stigma that you're not a good Christian or you're not a good, you don't have much faith if that's what you do. It's like you're turning your back.
Yeah, and I have
Uh,
a major problem with that. I mean, anything that's new or different, doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. Let's look at Star Trek, for example. When it first came out, a lot of that stuff may have seemed far fetched, but there's a lot of our technology today which mirrors stuff that was in Star Trek. And so it's like, what a phone might be to us as everyday use. Imagine going to like a third world country that may not have phones or you know, go back 20 years when they didn't have cell phones that were like this, just in your hand holding basically a computer. To them that might seem like magic.
oh
And
yeah,
so
yes,
it's like I feel that if we don't publish in those specific genres, we're limiting not only ourselves, but we're limiting our children's imaginations.
right. And
You're not giving them the what if option.
I just think that limiting um, your perspective on based on the genre that you're writing
Mhm.
is self-defeating. And again, going back, and I hate to repeat myself, but if you introduce elements into fantasy and science fiction that to people who will never, ever, ever darken the door of a church,
Mhm.
uh, then you've already done more than reams of Christian fiction might have done because they don't read that.
Yeah.
Whether you like it or not, they just don't read that. But they read science fiction and fantasy,
Mhm.
and so that
I
does
mean,
that.
to think that teens or adults, you know, are going to Comic Cons are not at all Christian is kind of naive,
Yeah.
honestly.
Oh, yeah.
Because teens and adults love it, especially teens that grew up with the gaming systems.
So, and how many times have CJ have you been asked at these Comic Cons, well, is it appropriate for so and so age, or does it have,
Hmm.
you know,
What's the
is it
age you would put it at?
yes, yeah, and what would you like movie rating? What would it be? You know,
Hmm.
and that sort of thing. So, uh, it's not that, you know, these people, regardless of whether you see them at Walmart or at a Comic Con, are pretty much, you know, you have a same cross section of folks, more or less, you know.
Hmm.
So,
People are people at their core, and even from back in biblical times. Granted, they may not have been thinking about science fiction and fantasy, but you get the
yeah,
point. People
yeah.
are at their core, they were still asking the what if question back then. And can you imagine what they thought of Jesus healing people?
I will say this: when I first started writing, and with Treasure Hunt Club, I did debate. Well, should I have this person go, the main character, go to church?
Hmm.
It wasn't like it was a major part of the story. It was just an element, and I almost didn't do that because I thought, well, that's not what people who read this fantasy would like.
Hmm.
And but I went ahead and I put that in there for all the reasons we've talked about, and I've never regretted it. And you know, I've included other elements in stories in the books that I've written, and
Hmm.
I don't regret that either. And if people like them and they buy them, that's fine. If they don't, it's not going to change. Uh, you know, the way I feel or how I write.
Hmm. Yeah, it's kind of like when I first became an author. I had a friend who she wrote romance. And she kind of wanted to start to teeter into the paranormal side. And she says, "Do I get a new pen name?" And I said, "Why?" She's like, "Well, it's a different genre." And I said, "Well, are actors and actresses pigeonholed into one specific genre? They can only act in this genre?" She said, "No." I said, "Then why do it to authors?" And so the same thing applies here. Why limit, faith-based authors out of those specific genres? Because when you do it, you're actually hurting a lot of teens or adults who they like that and they appreciate it. And even now, there's actually more of a trend toward faith based books lately because people are getting tired of the same thing over and over again, so to speak.
Well, the quality, and that's a topic for another discussion, but PC checkoffs, you know,
Hmm.
on books have made them much more uh, vanilla and
Hmm.
you know, tasteless. But again, that's
You
another
know,
story.
does it fit the story? There are people everywhere. For example, in The Divine Legacy, there are various races and breeds and colors all through it, and it's because they're people from all over the world. And to think that only, one specific race is in the world is again naive. And when you put them in through a checklist, it's what's the word I want? It's frustrating. It's like you almost like, why do you even have to put that in there? It's like, does it fit the story? If it's the story, great, go for it.
Hmm. It
For
has to do that.
example, one of the hackers is blind. I didn't do that for political correction. I or i did it because, to me, that stops limiting somebody who's
Right.
blind.
Right.
In the Sands of Time trilogy, there's somebody in a wheelchair. They still have gifts. As a matter of fact, they're probably one of the strongest ones in there. But, that would encourage somebody who's in a I didn't do it specifically for my political checklist. I did it because that may encourage somebody
It's
who's in a wheelchair that, don't limit yourself. You may be the
part of the
strongest one of the
story.
bunch. Yeah,
It's
exactly.
part of the story. I
So
think of I think of the Lord of the Rings movies that Peter Jackson produced, which I
mhm,
love. And there's one scene there where Gandalf the wizard
mhm,
is with I think it's Bilbo, and
mhm,
they're sitting in the uh, underground, you know, and they've escaped the orcs and they're in a very bad way, and they're
Mhm.
sitting there next to each other. And what Gandalf said t- to Bilbo is, and I'm paraphrasing. I don't know exactly what it is word for word, but he says, you know, sometimes we have to believe that things happen for a reason
Mhm.
that we don't understand, and that's somewhat comforting. In other words, there's a greater power than
Mhm.
ourselves, and that sometimes we have to recognize that
And
and
trust it.
trust it. And
Mhm.
that's kind of exactly what he was saying. So, uh, you know, I love that scene. Of course, I've loved Lord of the Rings. That kind of got me started writing and reading fantasy. So,
Mhm.
but that was, and I don't think that was from the book. It might have been just something that they put in the movie, but it pretty much encapsulates what I believe and what I've tried to do in the
Right.
books that I write.
Well, that's a really good note to end on because we're a little bit over time. But, you know, just think about it, writers. If you are a Christian or if you are strong in whatever faith you're in, that might be an option for you to write in and don't limit yourself.
Exactly.
Readers, don't limit yourself to, if you like sci fi and fantasy, search out the Christian sci fi or the faith based sci fi and fantasy books because you might actually really find yourself pleasantly surprised. Some
Exactly.
of us, I've never been in a box. I never wanna be in a box. I throw the box away, and I just go with however the spirit leads is how I write.
Sure.
And so, yeah. On that note, just be encouraged that you can look around. There is stuff out there for you. Go for it. Parents, you can actually use it to help maybe create a bridge between you if you feel like there's, something in those books that might help you start a topic of conversation. In the meantime, next week is Valentine's Day. And we have a special guest coming on today, Miss Dana Wayne, who's going to be talking about romance versus love story. So I'm
She's a
super
great
excited.
speaker.
Oh, she's a kick. I cannot wait.
She is.
So until then, we will see you guys next Wednesday, 1 o'clock Central Time, same place you found us. And we'll see you then.
Bye
Bye.
bye.